This secret chapter of Space Marines are the Imperium's surest defense against that which the Emperor foresaw would be its greatest threat.
Warhammer 40,000 Chaos Gate Daemonhunters is a truly brutal game, fit for the grim darkness of its setting. Even if you're used to similar tactical combat classics like XCOM, you may be shocked just how much pain and suffering it can throw at you in the early hours. Luckily, we have delved into the chapter archives of the Grey Knights and come out with some powerful stratagems to give you the upper hand in banishing the fell monsters of the warp back from whence they came. In Demonhunters, it's easy to blitz headfirst into the fray and end up completely failing your campaign, especially in the opening act. Standard campaign difficulty feels much more like hard in other tactics games, so there's no shame starting off on Merciful, even if it's just for a few missions to get the hang of the basics. There are a lot of built-in failure spirals that can take root early on and you may not notice until much later, and missing out on the Requisition needed to expand your roster and dealing with the long healing times on wounded knights after just 1 or 2 botched landings can be absolutely excruciating to try to claw your way back from. If you're not playing on the hardcore Grandmaster mode, I'd even recommend restarting the first couple of missions a few times to try new tactics until you're able to clear them with few injuries. Or you can just let the chips fall as they may, watch the sector meet its doom, and start over from the top with everything you've now learned. Okay, I'm about to seriously boost your lethality, survivability, and unit cohesion with the most important small adjustment to how you play, which Demonhunters will never teach you about. This is ridiculously effective for how simple it is, and you will be in a world of hurt without it. You ready? Okay, here you go. Just stick together. All of your knights have 3 action points per turn. As you move across the map, taking advantage of cover, only spend 1 action point per knight at a time. So move knight number 1 as far as he can go in 1 action, then do the same with knight number 2, then number 3, and finally number 4. You can usually get away with a double move once you get the hang of this, but make sure everyone is close to the front line and grouped up before you use anyone's last action point for that turn or make contact with the enemy. You may be amazed how much of a boost this gives you, but marching this way means that when you uncover a group of enemies, your whole squad will be close enough to attack and support one another. And as long as they each have 1 action point left, you get a full free turn with your action points refreshed to max for the whole squad before your enemies get to take their first full turn. The number one thing you don't want to do is charge one knight way out ahead of the squad using all of his action points, uncover a group of enemies, and suddenly have to march everyone else up into range, allowing the enemy to basically get a free turn while your Marines just stand there getting riddled with holes. Without this tactic, the initiative will usually be against you. With it, you'll almost always be taking the fight to them. Planting your whole squad behind cover, activating Overwatch, and waiting for the enemy to attack can be a solid tactic in certain situations, like if you're fighting a bunch of plague bearers that can only attack at close range. But most gun-toting enemies, even regular cultists, have longer ranges than your standard stormbolters, so trying to camp will just let them take free shots at you or use abilities like suppression. As a rule of thumb, let melee enemies come to you, but against ranged opponents, it's best to get right up in their faces and blow them away as aggressively as possible. If you run into immobile Bloomspawn alongside mobile enemies, it usually pays to pull back until the mobile enemies are forced to engage without the support of the Bloomspawn. And try your best not to wander too far ahead and alert another enemy group before the one you're currently engaged with is wiped out. Speed can be important if you're trying to complete the mission without triggering the warp meter too many times, but dividing and conquering your enemies will serve you better most of the time. There are several different kinds of missions you'll run into, and you can make some of them way harder on yourself than they need to be. While clearing the map of enemies completely will get you more experience points, it's usually not worth the effort since your knights will take chip damage and have to spend time in the infirmary, meaning they could have to sit out a critical battle to come. So unless you really need to grind out some extra XP, if you can avoid an enemy patrol, you usually should. One mission type where this is especially relevant are the Bloom Spreader missions. missions, where all you have to do is kill the spreader itself and you'll immediately be teleported to safety. It doesn't matter if you're literally drowning in enemies. Once that thing is dead, you're home free. So in these missions, it's often a viable tactic to sprint across the map to the spreader, ignoring any other enemies along the way, and hitting it with everything you can to bring it down in 1 or 2 turns and immediately end the mission. Likewise, missions that only require you to eliminate all the seed carriers can be finished without much combat if you have an extractor servo skull, which you can unlock from the tech tree. RPG players might have caught on to this already, but tactics fans who are used to their soldiers being a bit more fragile, like in XCOM, may not have. You can build some very durable knights using Terminator armor, purity seals, and war gear add-ons that potentially allow one paladin to weather an absolutely ludicrous amount of damage in a single turn. Eventually, once you get access to storm shields, he can even use a defend action that acts as a kind of melee version of Overwatch. Once you've figured out your recipe for the perfect tank, never leave the ship without one of these guys. Damage to your health can cause wounds that need to be recovered in the infirmary even if you heal them in combat using an apothecary, but damage to shields is basically free. If you plop your tank in the middle of the enemy, out of cover, and use abilities like Aegis to boost their shields, you could come out of the entire battle without a lasting scratch. The Baleful Edict is in pretty bad shape when it comes under your command, and it can be tough to decide what needs your attention first. But in the long run, you'll get more upgrades overall if you start off by repairing things that help you with further repairs. Specifically, these are the Augmentation Chamber, which gives you more servitors, and Accelerated Construction, which does exactly what it sounds like. Once that's squared away, your next focus should be the Barracks, which allows you to have a larger roster of knights. That's going to be essential, since your knights will get wounded frequently and have to either sit out or deploy with an HP penalty that could lead to further devastation. Next, focus on upgrading the engine. Eventually, being able to take on 2 missions per Bloom event will really help you stay ahead of the growing Morbus, and you won't usually be able to make it to the second one in time with stock thrusters. Finally, get the infirmary upgraded as fast as possible. This one will take a while since you need 2 reactor upgrades first, so I wouldn't go for it right away, but the recovery time for wounds is borderline ridiculous without it, and you want your best knights ready to fight again as quickly as possible. Anything that gives you more prognosticars is also extremely valuable. This one may sound counterintuitive, but every once in a while the corruption on a planet will get so bad that the forces of Nurgle will try to open a Chaos Gate there, which will increase the Morbus tracker by 1 if you don't stop it. With infinite waves of very difficult enemies that spawn faster than you can realistically kill them, these are easily the hardest non-boss missions in the game, and even if you succeed, you may end up with multiple critically wounded knights. In my opinion, it's just not worth it. These events are pretty infrequent, as long as you're succeeding at normal missions to slow down the bloom, and making good progress tracking the Reapers to disable entire strains in one go. The highest I've ever seen it get is 3 out of 5. If the 5th gate is about to open, you really don't have a choice but to try and stop it. But until then, just focus on beating the campaign before it comes to that. It can be tempting to splurge and spend all your hard-won requisition on gear right after you finish a mission, but I recommend holding on to at least 8 requisition points for every Grand Master's report. This will allow you to upgrade your armory, which increases the level of gear you find at each mission. You want to max out the quality of your armor, weapons, and war gear drops as quickly as possible so you can get your whole squad kitted out with Tier 2 and 3 equipment. This will be a massive boost to your combat capabilities, and these items will probably end up replacing all that Tier 1 gear you might have wasted it on instead. As other tips on this list have suggested, planning for the long game will usually bring you big rewards in time. With this sacred knowledge, you should be more than ready to take on Nurgle's minions and stop the entire sector from falling to the virulent bloom. Stand firm, fear nothing. Those demons won't know what hit them. For more on Warhammer 40,000 Chaos Gate Daemonhunters, check out my review. Or for more strategy guides, check out these helpful tips for maintaining a dynasty in Crusader Kings 3. And for all your other gaming needs, keep it right here on IGN.
Commander, we cannot maintain this orbit for long.
Dispatch the assault team at once. I will join them and put an end to this myself.
Your will be done.